This happened last night as I was coming home from work. I'm a 23-year-old woman and I don't have a driver's license, so I take public transport or Uber a lot. I've had several people give me general bad vibes and make me feel unsafe, but this is the first time somebody has crossed the line from creepy to scary on a commute. I stayed a little later than usual at work yesterday because I'm trying to learn After Effects and I wanted to spend a little more time on the practice project I had going on. I left the office around 5:45 and walked 10 minutes to the bus stop. The sun was going down, but there was still light in the sky. I didn't have to wait long for the bus. The driver pulled up and was very friendly as she scanned my ticket, which is on my phone. I took one of the seats that faces the inside aisle, which I prefer not to do, but it was the only place to sit where I didn't have to sit directly next to somebody who was already on the bus, because, I value personal space. After a few stops, we made a stop near the major university in my city. A young guy got on, probably younger than me, but not by much, and sat directly next to me. He smelled bad, but not as bad as some people I've encountered on the bus, so I didn't think to move or anything. Right away, he made a sound like, "Ha!" And I thought he was going to comment on the music in my headphones, but he didn't. He looked at my phone. "Are you on Facebook?" "I'm on Twitter." "Never understood it. You ever sold anything on Facebook?" I said no. He kept asking me weird questions like that, like he just wanted to talk to me and he didn't care what it was about. At this point, I figured he was trying to flirt and was just bad at it. So I politely answered his questions and tried not to be too friendly about it. He asked if I was a student. I'm not. And whether I would rather live in a mansion or an apartment. Obviously a mansion, I told him. He said his goal was to have a house big enough to put a skate park in. "That's a good goal," I said, thinking that this guy was probably not playing with a full deck, but not wanting to be an asshole about it. He said, "You're awesome." Then he asked me, "Are you looking for a best friend?" I said no, that I have a best friend and we've known each other since we were 8 years old. And then, like it was so casual, he said, "If you tell me where he lives, I could kill him." I didn't know what to say. I looked around for someone on the bus to intervene, but nobody had heard what he said, so I just said, probably not." He laughed. "You smell good." I just put my headphones back on and tried to tune him out. There were no available seats for a couple of stops, so I just had to sit there with him talking in my ear. I couldn't hear him. I was listening to Pedro Fernandez as loud as I could. As soon as a seat opened up, I moved away from him to a forward-facing seat and put my purse next to me in defensive position. I started to get worried about whether this guy would get off the bus before I did. My destination was pretty far down the line, but I didn't need him following me home or even knowing where I usually get off the bus. What would have stopped him from waiting there for me? I texted my roommate to pick me up at the Hooters halfway home. Right as I did this, he got off downtown, and lucky for me because my roommate was busy and couldn't pick me up. Also, as a side note, my childhood best friend is a girl. I wasn't about to tell him that, though. So, creepy guy who wants to kill my BFF, take a different fucking bus next time. I know I'm probably going to get skeptics for this, but it's 100% true. I've already contacted the admins with proof, and I got permission to post this. Names were changed for privacy reasons, but this was covered by media outlets, which I have saved the links to. First, let me set some background information to make the flow of the story smoother. This happened almost 19 years ago. I was barely 13 years old, and I was being raised by my grandparents. We lived in a little tourist town in Florida. They had problems with their 2 daughters as adults, my mother being the older of the 2, and they wanted to do everything that they could to make sure that I didn't turn out the same way. a do-over, if you will. So, needless to say, they were very strict. My aunt was having a good period in her life, and she had her shit together. We were all very close. My aunt understood what it was like to be raised under a glass dome, metaphorically speaking. So, being as she was my only aunt, she made sure that the time we spent together was super cool. I would stay over Saturday nights, we would go out and hang out at the pier, and she would let me hang out with my middle school boyfriend who would find ways to get to wherever I was. My grandparents had no idea about any of these activities, of course. I was just spending some quality time with my aunt and giving them a break. It was nice to see that I had a younger female figure since my mom wasn't around. One night, when we were out having fun, my aunt meets this guy and they really hit it off. He was very nice and introduced himself to me. He went by JR, and at first he was kind and charming, a talker. They exchanged numbers after hanging out a while, and then we went home and went to bed. They ended up going out a bit more, and my aunt had really liked JR. He took her to his home and introduced her to his father and showed her around his land. They lived out in the woods, in the middle of nowhere. I have lived in this town for 30 years, and I still to this day couldn't tell you where it was. I was only there once. He was teaching my aunt how to shoot a gun. I remember her shoulder rocking back with the impact of the shot, and it surprising her. He had these weird flamenco dancing clothes in his closet. It was all seemingly harmless. I mean, everyone has their quirks, right? About 10 days, maybe 2 weeks later, we were again at the pier out by the payphones talking about what to do that night and what to get for dinner. JR and my aunt were in their late 20s, early 30s, and as much as she loved me, I imagine there were times that I got in the way. Well, anyway, we were at the pier, and he's talking about how he has these painkillers. He offered me one. I declined, of course, and I told him I had a high tolerance to pain anyway and didn't need that stuff. He then, with a huge smile, asks me if I can see for himself, assuring he won't really hurt me, he's just trying to have fun. This bastard twists my arm behind my back until I hear a pop. I start to cry, and he laughs, and he says, "Aw, sweetheart, I was only playing. You said you had a high tolerance. I guess I was stronger than I thought I was being. I'm sorry, no need to ruin the good time we were all having." I go in the private pier office, which my granddad managed, crying. My aunt comes in and lets me know that she thinks it's fucked up too, and that she talked to him about it. She goes back outside, and he asks her what she's up to that night. She tells him that she isn't sure if I'm staying over because of what just happened. I was whining about going home. I was pissed that she hadn't decked him right there for hurting me. Well, he tells her that she should meet him under, let's call it, the Sunset Bridge at 2 a.m. on the other side of town. He says that the stars are beautiful and you can listen and hear the fish. He tells her he would love to see it with her, and they can dance under the moon. We were all from a fishing family and live in a fishing town, so fish activities under the bridge at late times wasn't necessarily something that threw up a red flag. If it's dark and late, there won't be people there hogging all the fish. She tells him maybe, and we leave. I decide to spend the night after all, later sneaking in only if she will pick up my boyfriend Charlie. Playing up on the guilt points, you know. She calls him when she gets home, before we made our arrangements about Charlie, and says that she can come, but she'll have me with her. He groans and is like, "Fine, all right, I guess she can come too. Maybe she'll get tired and sleep in the car." About an hour after she called him the first time, I ask her about Charlie, and she agrees. She sits down with me and hugs me and touches my face lovingly, apologizing for what had happened with my arm. She then calls him again and tells him not to worry. She's picking up Charlie, so I will have my own entertainment and they can have their time. He goes into a rage and starts sputtering and cussing about how it's too complicated now and he just wanted an intimate meeting with her, not a damn family reunion. He went on about how he didn't want to have to babysit a 13-year-old kid and her 14-year-old boyfriend. He hangs up after calling her a crazy bitch. She bewilderingly hangs up the phone and tells me what happened. We go on about our night with pizza rolls and PlayStation, and things are fine. He calls her a few more times and drives by the house for a couple weeks after, but my aunt was having none of it. After a while, he left our lives just as swiftly as he had came. The whole affair lasted only a month, if that, 3 weeks maybe, and it wasn't the crazy experience that she had had with a man, but JR was soon forgotten and we went around our business. Flash forward 2 years later. I'm in middle school. My aunt had moved to a city about 40 miles away. I still lived with my grandparents. They were still strict, but as they had gotten older, so had I. I knew a few ways around the rules. One day my friend Frank and I missed the bus home from school and called our good high school friend Darla to pick us up and take us home after riding around a bit. She had this big, beautiful red truck, and I would ride around in the cab of it, loving the freedom and the wind. We were smoking cigarettes and laughing, listening to the radio. The time I would have spent on the bus before my stop was just enough time to hit up the taco drive-thru. We cruised down the road a bit, heading back to Frank and I's house. We had a lot of fun that day. She dropped me off first. My grandparents came outside. They were heavily confused at the sight of an unknown vehicle, and even more so when they saw that I had gotten out of it. After letting her be the one to explain, because she was older, cooler, and more responsible, my grandparents thanked her for being kind enough to take me home. They said how lucky I was that she had just happened to be there to help get me home. The things we do to our grandparents, huh? That was the last time I ever saw my friend. She didn't show up for work for 5 days. I can't speak for everyone, but I assumed she just ran away. Darla's parents were going through a nasty divorce. The dad had gotten a hot new girlfriend, the mother was very bitter, rightfully so, I guess. It was embarrassing for all the kids. Her truck wasn't left behind. I figured she got tired of her parents acting like infants and took off. I missed her, but she was in a whole other league of freedom and coolness. 16 is a whole different life than 14, especially when you're in different schools. I wished her well, maybe even a little envious that she got out of this town and I was still here. I hadn't heard anything for 2 weeks, when at about 9 o'clock at night, my grandparents got a phone call to turn on the news. Darla's body was found out in the woods. She'd been strangled to death and just left out there. I don't even know for how long. I was devastated. I was so joyful that I had that last experience with her, but so saddened and horrified. She was so young, barely older than myself. She was just about to be 17 in a few short months. It was a very sad time for our town. The good and bad news is they caught the guy that had done it. He confessed after some very incriminating evidence, and during his questioning also confessed to killing his girlfriend, who had been missing for about 4 years, and also his father, staging his death to look like a suicide by hanging. When they showed his mugshot on the screen and said his name, I swear I almost passed out. There, clear as day on the screen, staring back at me, was a picture of JR. I had no idea they even knew each other. I can't even imagine what would have happened if we had gone under the bridge that night. Investigation Discovery did a piece on it a couple of years back. I was shocked to see it on TV. The memories came rushing back, and I decided to write them all down. I literally have a newfound appreciation of life now that I'm old enough to understand just how close I could have come to being killed. I have a beautiful life with my husband and 3 boys that most likely wouldn't have happened if things had gone differently that night. A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store, and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and last minute check the trash. It was time for a cigarette, and I had one headphone in, kinda jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much-needed piss. Against the sheriff's office, though? Yeah, the building closes at 4 p.m. and doesn't open again until 6 the next morning, but why? By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car, and then at me, and then back and forth again. As the customer is leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning and had left my dustpan outside with a squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me or some shit like that. The man was still there, but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he's yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and could barely stand straight, still swaying away. I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off him this time. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs has been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. I didn't like it at all, and I wanted no part of it. I still had almost 3 hours to go, and 2 before any other employees got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporarily closed sign just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the counter on my way to the doors when I saw that he'd walked across the road to my side. I literally, just fucking barely, got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hands made the mime hand signal for cut across my neck, basically saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth, too, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away, but screamed something at me while he's walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean, like, he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. Definitely knowing I'm in the wrong shift or the wrong job, I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops. It's a good thing, too, because the minute I hung up with them, there he comes again up to the door. He starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I had called the cops, and that his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't get where he could have gone to. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have had to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just glad I don't work there anymore. I've worked at this new job for a few weeks now. I'm the last shift to leave, which isn't late. It's only about 7 o'clock, but it's still dark out. Today I left and there were a couple of cars in the lot for my building, but I left alone. I see a car circling the parking lot. His lights are off. He makes another circle and he's behind my car. He stops. He inaudibly says something, just looking at me. And I almost walked forward. I told him to repeat himself. Unintelligible whispers again. My gut drops. I stand firmly away from him and demand that he speaks up. Finally, he says, "Do you know where the freeway is?" It's literally one light away from where we are and clearly visible. He then stops after I tell him and asks me what my name is. I get back away and get into my car. This man is not looking for directions. He slowly exits the parking lot. I wait, watching him. He turns left, away from the freeway. That's the way I go home. As I'm driving down the street, I see him circling a hotel parking lot. Lights off. Same slow movement. Am I overreacting? Either way, let's not meet. I have lots of creepy encounters during my travels, but I'll start with the most recent one. This is fairly long, as I had two creepy encounters, one after the other. For clarification, I am Asian, with distinct Asian features, 5'1", in the small, and in my 20s. I also want to point out that just because this incident happened in Egypt doesn't mean that it couldn't have happened anywhere else. It's just where I happened to be. Last year, I went to Egypt with a big group of 40 people. For one night, we stayed at this beautiful villa-style hotel on top of the mountains. The layout for this particular hotel is that there's a very long pool in the middle, surrounded by small villas with about 20 rooms per villa. Our group got assigned to the farthest villa from the lobby. It was around 10 p.m. when I decided to go for a walk and watch the stars and all. My grandma, who I was sharing the room with, was tired and went to sleep early, so I went out by myself. I walked around the pool, enjoyed the weather and the stars. I sat on one of the benches by the poolside. It was then that I noticed one of the hotel staff, a bag porter who helped with our luggage when we checked in, approaching me. I thought nothing of it, but he came by and made small conversations. I brushed it off as him just trying to be friendly and courteous to the guests. He asked where we came from, and I answered politely. What he said next gave me the creeps. He said his friend was actually looking for a wife from my country. Okay, dude. I laughed it off and lied and said that I was married. He asked where my husband was. I kind of panicked and I told him that my non-existent husband got left behind because he had to work. He took out his phone and called someone, but I guess the person he was calling wasn't picking up. He told me to wait, but my spidey senses were tingling on overdrive. I had two options: to walk back to the villa as quickly as possible but risk letting this man know the room where I was staying with my grandma, or walk towards the well-lit lobby, hoping that there were people from my group still there. I stood up and started to walk fast to the lobby. The man was still trying to call someone on his phone and tried to call after me, but I waved goodbye hurriedly. When I got to the lobby, I was relieved to see our tour leader, our Egyptian tour guide, and probably 3 ladies from our group there. No more creepy hotel staff. Or so I thought. In the hotel lobby, they have a bunch of souvenir shops set up. One of the ladies I was close to, B, was browsing inside the papyrus shop. Our guide had warned us beforehand that the papyrus paintings they sell at this hotel are fake, or generally low-quality tourist trap souvenirs. So I went inside the shop to tell B about that, in case she'd forgotten. Inside the shop was B, myself, and two salesmen. One of them was standing near the door and blocking the only means of exit. B asked for my opinion between two paintings, and the salesman, standing in front of us, told us that these paintings have a different pattern that show up only in the dark. He asked us if we wanted to see that it was glow in the dark. I firmly said no before B could answer. I had had enough for the day and just wanted to go back to our room. However, this persistent salesman said something to the other man standing behind us, who then proceeded to close the door and turn off the light switch. Fuck, I was thinking. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but I don't like the idea of being in a pitch-dark room with two men I don't know. I could also sense that B was panicking, and she held onto my wrist. Like an angel in disguise, the door suddenly opened from outside, and it was B's aunt, who was also in the lobby with our tour guide, who shouted at us and asked us what we were doing. She motioned for us to come out quickly. I swear I do not know what would have happened if B's aunt hadn't opened the door at that time. She made a fuss over it, and the rest of the group walked back to the villa together with our tour leader. On the way to the villa, B's aunt asked us if anything happened, if our phones and wallets were still with us. We checked our belongings, and everything was fine. No one followed us back to the villa, and I was so happy that we were checking out the next morning. So, creepy porter and salesman at this hotel? If ever I find myself back at this hotel, let's not meet. I took a gap semester a couple of years ago and decided that I should take a road trip with a buddy who was also taking a semester off from school. We are from the Midwest and planned our trip to take a big circle from Ohio to LA, up to Portland, and then back home. We're outdoorsy guys, so we knew we were trying to hit some wilderness along the way. So we're about a month into the trip and leaving Portland, where we were taking a break from camping every night while on the road. Itching to get back on the road and into the wilderness, my buddy finds a hike that looks interesting. It was an abandoned railroad about 2 hours east of Portland. He had found the GPS coordinates on some site, maybe Reddit, and said that there was an abandoned railroad with a couple of tunnels and a massive trestle, like a bridge, that spanned a huge gorge. Sounds cool. I'm in. So we drive my Volvo station wagon towards this coordinate. If you've never been to Oregon, it is beautiful. Foggy, never-ending views of thick pine forests, the type of place that you can barely see 20 feet in any direction because of how dense the trees are. For the last hour of this 2-hour drive, we are driving on a dirt logging road. Haven't passed a single car or seen any sign of life since turning off a rural highway. It was creepy. Endless, dark forests for hours. Stop. I hit the brakes. My buddy is squinting at his phone. Looks like we're at the coordinate. I pull to the side of the one-lane road and put the Volvo in park. Dense trees are still around us, but I can see up ahead that there is a linear gap in the canopy. I guess that's the railroad. We hop out of the car and I load up my day pack with my camera, headlamp, water, and pepper spray, and a knife. After a second thought, I put the knife in my pocket. This railroad has been abandoned for about 50 years. This means that while you can still see the tracks while standing on them, thick brush has filled the entire swath that is typically cleared on either side of the tracks. It's nearly filled in the space between the rails, except for a foot-wide path that has been maintained by deer, elk, bear, and maybe some humans. I notice my buddy is also looking at a sign that says private property. It's fading away into a tree nearby. He looks at me, and I shrug. We start walking. The tracks are dead straight. And this means that we can see a couple hundred yards down the center of this green tunnel of vegetation, as if I'm in a very narrow alleyway that never ends. To either side, I can hardly see 10 feet. We walk and we walk, honestly a boring hike considering there was no view and it was dead straight, but we knew that the tunnel was up ahead, so we kept going. I kept myself busy by trying to pace my stride with each railroad tie. Step after step, we walk about 3 miles away from the car into the woods. Suddenly I stop, and my buddy bumps into my backpack. I had just looked up from my feet and was staring at a looming tunnel in front of us. Covered in moss, the entrance surrounded a black hole that went right into a mountainside. Again, we shrugged and turned on our headlamps before walking on. Graffiti covered what wasn't covered with moss, and moss was starting to cover areas that were covered by graffiti. Our headlamps dimly lit the walls, covered with fairly creepy graffiti. I stared eye to eye with a 20-foot-tall mummy head that was made with white paint. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, it was so dark, and we couldn't yet see the end of the tunnel. Drips of water echoed off the walls, and my buddy and I quickly walked down the tracks in silence. I had my knife out, at my side. I was relieved to get out. From the exit of the tunnel, I could already see a massive gorge up ahead. The tracks went across a wooden bridge that screamed PNW, or Pacific Northwest. It was easy to forget about the creepiness of the tunnel, and I looked forward to busting out my camera. Once I set foot on the bridge, I realized the danger of crossing something that hadn't been maintained in 50 or so years. The wood was clearly aged, and in some places rotten, but the view was incredible. We balanced on the steel tracks and walked to the center of the trestle, where we could see a river about 500 feet below. Horrible logging scarred the mountainsides along the gorge. I noticed places where the boards had broken through. I hoped that nobody had fallen. Instead of turning back after getting some good shots, we kept going. The sun was getting into a late afternoon angle and was blocked by the steep mountains around us. We quickly walked off the bridge and back into our green tunnel. For some reason, I started having some second thoughts. I don't know why they came now, but I slowed my pace and started thinking about how I would ask my buddy to turn around. Before I was going to turn around, I asked Nate, I glanced up at the tracks ahead and directly into someone's eyes about 200 yards ahead. I stop in my tracks and feel a cold rush to my hands and head. The person staring at me has stopped too. I see another man's head poke around his. There's 2 of them, I whisper back to Nate. Slowly, we start walking down the green tunnel towards the men, away from our cars, miles behind us. They are walking towards us, towards our car, miles behind us. As we get closer, I walk faster out of fear. Bouncing on the man's chest is a large bush knife. He's wearing filthy clothes, has long matted hair, and has not broken eye contact. A revolver is tucked into his pants, and he is carrying a rifle with a magazine. At this point, it's too late to turn back, and I realize that my buddy and I are going to have to squeeze by these men on the narrow gap between the tracks. The brush is pulling at my sleeves on either side of the tracks. "How's it going?" I nervously ask as I squeeze by the men while avoiding eye contact. I count 4 guns and catch a stench of BO. I'm unsettled by the way these guys look, and I got a feeling I have never felt around another human. They say nothing and push past us. I keep hurrying away, and before I know they're out of sight. And when I look behind me and past Nate, I turned to Nate and gave him my "what the fuck" face. After walking silently for 10 minutes, we stop. I don't know what to say. I don't want to walk deeper in, but I also don't want to walk back towards where the creepy dudes are going. Suddenly, loud moaning and shrieking starts coming from the dense woods off the side of the tracks. It sounds like it's about 100 yards away. It doesn't sound completely human, but it sounds like it's in agony. That was the final straw. We bolt back towards the cars. Now I'm not a runner, but we ran back over that bridge, through the black tunnel, and through the endless green that surrounded us. Finally, I see the logging road up ahead where our car is parked. I stop running when I hear a truck idling. I can start to see it through the bush. A big, old F-350 lifted pickup truck idling right behind my car. My station wagon looks comically small in comparison. I can see two men sitting in the truck with their doors open and guns out, staring directly at us, waiting. Nate and I shrug to each other again, but this time with fear in our eyes. "Just get in the car," I stammer to Nate. We hop in, and I stare at the men in our rearview mirror. We wait. My heart is pounding. Are they going to kill us? I think. A knife and pepper spray are totally useless. After waiting what felt like an hour, the men haven't taken their eyes off us. We can't back up, given how close they are behind us. I notice a fairly solid-looking shoulder to the road to my right, and decide we should try to pull a quick U-turn and get away. So that's what I did. Turned the wheel all the way and floored it. Thankfully, my car made the turn and was able to clear the back of their truck. We drove as fast as we could down the logging road in absolute silence. No truck behind us. Our dust plume rose up and hid the scene we had just been in. I drove all the way to Idaho that night, and had my eye on the rearview mirror the whole time. So militiamen, let's not meet again. Some background info. I am in my early 20s, 5'2", and male. I also have a baby face, so I'm often called buddy or young man. The average customer thinks I'm around 15 or 16, to be honest. Anyways, the event. So this old man, I'm guessing mid-60s, came into my work this morning and was eyeing me very strangely. I work behind the counter at a local McDonald's to help pay for my schooling. I've never seen him before. I didn't think much of it. Just thought he was a typical weird old man, or maybe he was wondering why my 12-year-old looking ass was working at 11 a.m. on a school day. When he was about to leave, he said I'd do well at my job, and I thanked him. He then gave me this napkin that said the following: "Hi. You interest me. I'd like to see you again. Maybe meet for a coffee. I like to be friends. Roger, phone number if interested." He underlined the word friends, which creeped me out as well. I told my boss about this incident immediately, and since she also saw the man, she knew that this wasn't just an old man looking for a chat. He apparently was staring at me the whole time he was sitting inside. He was eating while I was working, but he barely took his eyes off me even to eat. She let me take a picture of the napkin, then put it in an envelope in the office. The camera is cut off at the lobby entrance, so we don't know if he drove off or walked. She told me if she or myself were to see him again, she would immediately kick him out, and if need be, call the police. She also got a very bad vibe from this man. Listen, y'all, I know I look like a 12-year-old boy, which makes this creepy as fuck. So old man who came into my McDonald's to find a new friend? Let's not meet.